All right, we are back at the Cracks in Postmodernity. Today we have Julie Bindel, who is a journalist, a feminist campaigner, and she's the author of the most recent book, Lesbians, Where Are We Now? Julie, thanks so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
Been reading your work for a while now. I've edited some of your pieces in Compact, and it's left me with a lot of questions. There's a lot of thought-provoking stuff you're putting out there. And I think I want to just start by asking you to tell listeners, if they're not already familiar with you, tell us a little bit about your own background, your story, and how you got into writing about the topics you're covering now.
I was born in 1962 in a deprived area of the northeast of England, and so grew up with amongst working class labourers and without very much education. So the schools were bad, and there was barely any resources put into that particular area of England at the time. Still remains the same. And so grew up with a sense of, I suppose, injustice and unfairness and inequality, seeing how working class people were treated, in particular working class women, and left the school system early, got involved in feminist activism because I was looking for lesbians. I knew that I wouldn't find any in my community. It was too dangerous to be out amongst some of the people that knew me, not my family, but some of the really rough fighting boys at my school. And I moved south to a city called Leeds in Yorkshire, where I met lesbians who were all feminists. And that's how it was in the late 1970s. The two movements were pretty indivisible. And that's how I started being involved in the women's liberation movement. But it wasn't until quite a bit later, in fact, when I was 40, after I left academic research on violence against women, that I started um, my full-time journalism career and had picked up bits of writing comment pieces for The Guardian at that time on my feminist activism and on the research that I was doing on violence against women. And so I moved from writing op-eds to doing investigative pieces, left academia, which was joyful to leave academia. And that's how my writing career began.
It's interesting you're talking about how, I guess in the 70s, you see how much both the lesbian, gay liberation movements, but also feminist movements were very much intertwined. And I mean, I'm curious if you notice differences between that relationship in the UK versus in the US, because I mean, from what I know about 70s US feminism is that, you have people like Betty Friedan, very worried about what quote unquote the lavender menace and, lesbians kind of overtaking the feminist movement. It seems like there was a little bit of animosity here. But yeah, I mean, do you notice like a difference between how that played out US versus UK?
Very much so. So Betty Friedan and her Lavender Menace slurs was before my time in the movement. And obviously, it was deeply offensive. She couldn't have meant it any other way. But she was right to be concerned because, of course, lesbians were predominant in the feminist movement, in more in the UK than in the US. In the US, there was a big class division, and I know the class system in the US is different, but it was far more professional, moneyed women who were involved in movements where they had a salary for doing that work. In the UK, it was more grassroots, unpaid feminism, grassroots feminism. And so there's always been a difference between the movements. I've always seen US feminism, although I do have some great friends and colleagues in the US that do not fit this bill, as tamer, as a bit more timid, reticent about speaking out about controversial topics, and far more in the kind of upper middle class bracket. And whilst we certainly have problems with so-called feminists, I mean the very liberal types that chant the whole sex work is work, trans women are women types, who never need to use a single sex refuge or rape crisis centre themselves, who are moneyed, who can pay for the services that most women can't. I do see American feminists as more careful and a bit more concerned about their image and being liked. This is a terrible generalization. I'm going to get loads of flack for this. You might even get flack for it. But
From
but
you.
British feminists are a bit more in your face.
Okay. I mean, I do want to come back to this question about the US versus UK differences, but I mean, first off, I want to kind of identify, looking back to when you got started with activism in the 70s, fast forwarding to now. Um, I don't know. I mean, so much has changed in terms of like gay rights movement, but also just the conception of homosexuality, what it is, what it constitutes, now in 2026. I mean, what would you say are some of the major differences you see now in, again, how lesbianism is construed, how it's advocated for in terms of, civil rights versus back then in the 70s?
Well, a big difference for lesbians is, and this is in many ways a good thing, and many people will have never thought it was anything but a good thing, is now far more like a version of the normative heterosexual family with children, a mortgage, two incomes, doing the kind of things at weekends that people who are seen as normal and mainstream do. And that's become possible through legislative equality and through social norms shifting, obviously, through attitudinal shifts. But I think one of the main things that's different on the negative, and it kind of comes with that package of the picket fence as opposed to the picket line that we used to be on far more, is that we've lost a radical edge that was necessary to fight to get our rights when we were being sacked from our jobs. We were being punishment raped because some men took great offense at the fact that we were rejecting them sexually just by being lesbians. Where it was perfectly legal for a hotel to look at two women checking in for the night and refuse us a room, turn us away, where we could be just blatantly discriminated against in the most outrageous ways. And all of those things that I've just mentioned has happened to me. And not because there's something quite extraordinary about me. Most of the things that I've just mentioned have happened to every single lesbian I know of my age or a bit younger. So things have shifted a great deal. We have now pretty much legal parity with heterosexuals. Obviously, children are an important issue because it means that a same-sex couple, two lesbians can adopt a child together, whereas it used to be that one half of the couple had absolutely no legal rights of parentage. So important shifts in that way. But what it has done is, I think, leave many lesbians complacent as to what still needs to be done.
Mm.
I have never seen such a huge gap, a chasm between the law saying you're all right now, you have full legal equality, and societal attitudes towards lesbians.
Mhm.
It's huge. And many people can write off some of the terrible attitudes towards lesbians today as they might reframe it as progressive. For example, telling us that we really should include men in our dating pool if they call themselves lesbians, and that we're bigots if we don't. And that
Mm.
lesbian now is a buzzword for many young progressives, particularly in the US, but also in the UK, the upper class ones in universities, for bigot, for
Mm.
intolerant. And in fact, lesbians were the ones back in the times when we had what I call the old-fashioned hatred towards us. You're a fucking filthy dyke. You're abnormal. Who does what in bed? Who's the man? When we go back to that era, that time, there was a conscious effort made to always recognize that the oppression and the discrimination that lesbians faced was because we were women, but it
Mm.
was being women on steroids. It was being women with an edge,
Yeah.
something else to go bonkers about our existence as in-your-face activists. So, yes, there's a huge difference now, but it's not all for the good. And back when it was the old bigotry, there was some really serious activism that meant there was much more of a coherent voice speaking out against the things that we knew were causing it, which is, sorry about the old-fashioned word, but patriarchy.
Mm. But I mean, let's get into this. I don't know what you were saying earlier that the inevitable result of all these, like the policy changes defending gay rights, what ends up happening is that, okay, now being gay is considered normal. Love is love. I mean, it's a lot of gay people aspire to this bourgeois ideal of, like you said, the white picket fence, when, I mean, at least from my point of view, I think homosexuality is inherently countercultural. It's
Hmm.
challenging,
Hmm.
social, but also, I don't know, like certain moral norms.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's what makes it interesting. So I don't know. I mean, how do you reconcile the fact that, okay, like you recognize the value of, the countercultural charge with the fact that, okay, like now there are legal rights. I mean, I don't know, how do you feel like being at this I guess this crossroads?
Well, I agree with you entirely. I think that there has been a huge overreach by gay men and queer identified men in the main that have demanded all kinds of irrelevant letters get added to the alphabet. I never asked for the B or the G to be added. The LGB, the lesbian and gay movement, yes, we come together on the basis of necessity, such as in the UK, the only piece of legislation ever targeted at both lesbians and gay men, Section 28, which we fought together. Yes, of course, bisexuals face discrimination when they're with a same-sex partner or recognised as someone who's same-sex attracted, but not, I would argue, as bisexuals. And so I think that although many gay men, I agree with some of the aims and objectives of many gay men, particularly those who are political, and many of them are my friends, but we have nothing in common. We really have very little in common at all, except for we're same-sex attracted. We have different needs, different perspectives, different lifestyles. In the main, again, a generalization that'll get us shot. But I didn't want the rest of the alphabet soup. The queer is irrelevant. The questioning is deeply offensive. The intersex people never wanted to be added to sexual identities. The trans issue is a gender identity that is refutable. So where I think we are now is you can still be part of that counterculture to remind people that there are differences amongst us as humans. So, for example, it's quite good, I think, for heterosexuals to recognize that they're heterosexual. When I've said that to people in the past, they've said, no, I'm not, I'm just normal. No, no, you are, it's a word. We have to use the word for us. As lesbian or gay, you are heterosexual. It's like being reminded that somebody's white.
Yeah.
They just think that they're the norm. So I do think it's important, but we have to recognize we are a tiny minority. We are a really small minority. And that means something. Society has to adapt, but we can't force the whole of society's hand in recognizing that everyone should fully understand and appreciate and buy into um, the cultural and societal issues of being lesbian and gay.
Hmm.
There should be no discrimination. There should be no legal discrimination. There should be an understanding when kids are growing up saying, but I don't want to marry the opposite sex. I'm in love with my school friend who's the same sex. We should have that understanding.
Yeah.
But the overreach has been disastrous. So if you actually look at these so-called pride parades, whether it's in New York or London or Prague, the things that some of the largely men are doing on those parades in the name of gay liberation would not and should not be tolerated if heterosexual men are doing it.
Yeah.
There's the over sexualization, the imposition of kink and all its accoutrements, at pride events where kids are encouraged to go, not acceptable, wouldn't be acceptable at a heterosexual event.
Mm.
And lesbian feminists back in the days when I was still in my late teens and through early 20s, we were really revolutionary in being extremely open about women's sexuality, sexual pleasure. We were non-monogamous. I mean, it didn't work. There was too much insecurity and jealousy, but we tried it. It's
Mm.
now referred to as polyamory. We pretty much invented it amongst women. We were very open about sex and sexuality and sexual pleasure. This is not a prudish attempt to shut down expressions of sexuality. It's saying, this is a cesspit of, some people would call it immorality, and I think that word has been bastardized, so it means something different to what it should. But, I think that the demand for the acceptance of kink and polyamory and trans parents raising kids not knowing what their sex is, they would call it their gender, is wrong and damaging. And it has caused a backlash against gay men and lesbians, and we're having to weather that storm.
Yeah, it's interesting that you characterize it as an overreach. Because again, it's one thing to say you want to advocate for someone's right to like be treated like a human being, to not get beat up in the streets, to be ostracized. Fine. But again, like when you try to normalize or yeah, like when you try to normalize or kind of make bourgeois something that again is inherently countercultural, it's like you're forcing, what do they say, like a square peg into a round,
Right.
which I think again, it's like it takes away the countercultural charge, but it's also just confusing because it's not accurate. And I mean, it's funny what you're saying though about like what's going on in the pride parades because I'm noticing in New York City, the only people who are really going now are straight women. Like
Right.
and them, and then also, okay, like whoever is walking in the parade, these, gay rights organizations and corporations, whatever. But I don't know, like I am finding that gay men don't really want to go because they find it to be too, again, too polished and too, if they want to do weird, kinky things, they're gonna go to a bar and or
Yeah.
like to a nightclub and do that. They don't want to do that on the streets because it's like, why would it's not fun if you do it on the streets,
Right. And
you
if we
know?
had a different word for pervert, because I think that word is really unfortunate, because it
Sure.
but if we had a different word for that, I'd be ascribing it to the men that wanted to do it in the streets, because
Yeah,
I've never cared that men do that stuff in the back room of
sure.
bars. That's their space. They have every right to that. I don't really mind in the slightest if men have 100 sexual partners in a week and don't know either of their names, any of their names. That's not my business, and it's certainly not my problem.
Yeah.
But I think that inviting the kink and the queer into a lesbian and gay rights movement is wholly wrong, because it just becomes a sex fest. And if you want to
Yeah.
have a sex fest, you can't do it on the street, and you cannot involve children. And we've seen through, I mean, my own investigations about Pride in Surrey, I made a podcast series about a scandal in England with two leaders of Pride in this particular area, quite a big county in England, where they were using the cover of being senior in Pride to procure children, to abuse children,
Mm.
which resulted in the rape of a 12-year-old boy. And
Wow.
both of those men are serving lengthy prison sentences now. And women in the Pride movement who were lesbians tried to speak out and say, there's red flags all over the place about this bloke, one particular man, Stephen Ireland.
Mm.
And they weren't listened to because, of course, women are just prudes that point out that this sex fest is hugely problematic and is pointing to vulnerable children being in harm's way. And we were right. And there are currently, I think it's 5 or 6 men in prison right now that are previously involved in the Pride movement who used it as a smokescreen. Why didn't we learn lessons from the Catholic Church when endemic abuse was being covered up and denied, by some of the priests who were then they hid behind their clergy cloak. So this has caused huge problems, and it began with adding all of those letters to the alphabet
Mm,
and us being expected to march alongside male straight kinksters.
mm. But I mean, let's stay on this topic of lesbians and the relationship between lesbian and gay men, because I mean, something I think you wrote recently about, I think butch erasure and how, I don't know, like if you look at advertisements, or if you look at, I don't know, TV shows and movies today, if there is a lesbian character or a lesbian person in the ad, like they're usually not going to be butch, they're going to be femme. Whereas you see plenty of effeminate gay men, the sassy gay best friend everywhere. I mean, he's kind of
Right.
become a commodity for straight women. And it's because I think like the sassy gay man is presented as fun and
Mm,
entertaining and funny, whereas the butch is like, oh, she's dour and she's serious.
right.
Uh, yeah. But I don't know. I mean, I'm curious, like, how do you see that relation? Because I know you were saying, like, the whole LGB thing was more a matter of, just being pragmatic, being, having to work together to accomplish your ends, not so much like a natural affinity. And I don't know. I mean, my kind of theory has always been that there's this jealousy between gay men and lesbians that, like, I think the lesbian is jealous of the man who gets to act masculine and forgoing that opportunity and vice versa. That's my weird theory. I don't know. But anyway, I'm curious to,
Well,
to know your thoughts on like how that relationship has evolved over time and where you
well,
see it today.
there might be something in that.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a fresh theory, so I like it. I mean, there was the joke that was all around lesbian circles. I was burgled by a gay man. How do you know? Because he tidied up and changed the curtains before he left. I mean, there's all those stereotypes. I think we've seen the return of the fag hag, which
Mhm.
was never a pleasant dynamic
Yeah.
with all of this women ingratiating themselves to men. And actually, interestingly, back in the 1980s, before the gender wars, it was very, very regular to hear gay men refer to themselves and each other as she,
Mm,
and for lesbians to play along with this. There was no heavy prescribed, you mustn't give away the female pronouns. It's going to be the end of our rights. I mean, it was
mm,
part of our counterculture. It was fun. We didn't mind it at all. We minded some of the misogynistic drag acts that were in the mixed gay clubs. Some of the misogyny around that was just really bad. But in terms of the relationship between lesbians and gay men, we do have a connection, for example, with crises. And the gender war crises has been the only one that I've ever thought was a really serious crisis because the Section 28 threat back in the 1980s, which was a local government act that meant that teachers and other public workers couldn't present homosexuality as a positive thing. So, for example, in schools. But the way that some gay men talked about that, they'd never experienced direct oppression before. As
mm.
women, it was our basis, right? A lot of the,
Yeah.
especially the wealthy white gay men, had never experienced oppression before. They were always seen as just some theatre lovey and accepted. And they went bonkers. I remember one newspaper headline, or rather, it was in a gay magazine, where some gay man had written, "This is the road to Auschwitz," about
Wow.
Section 28. And some of us actually wrote into that publication and said, well, it isn't actually. It's a bother. It's discrimination. We need to get rid of it. But if you think this is a massive crisis akin to the Holocaust, there's
Yeah.
something wrong with you and you
Yeah.
need to get out and live a bit more. So we've always had a fractious relationship. There's always been tension between the lesbians that are also feminist about the pro porn, pro rent boy prostitution scene. And there's always been tension between lesbians and gay men when gay men were a lot more liberal about, for example, the paedophile information exchange
Mm.
hanging onto our coattails back in the bad old 70s. But here we are again. We've got it again now. We've got it with the Kingsters and the Stephen Island child abusers. So It's tricky, but I have made many gay male friends throughout the gender wars and have found that the ones concerned about the rights that lesbians are going to lose if we're forced to take men into our dating pool, that they are just decent human beings. They're clear thinkers, they're bright and intelligent, they don't dislike or hate women, and we get on just great. But there is, I think, a tension that's always been there and always will be between gay men and lesbians. And in terms of the jealousy point that you've raised, I think that I think that's probably fair with some women who see the freedom, that relative freedom that some gay men get with their expression and behavior, and fancy themselves as, a little bit they fancy themselves as the leather-clad hero themselves. And I think, to be honest, it's pretty much why some butch lesbians were very attracted to the whole testosterone-led transition.
Interesting. Huh, okay. Wow. Um, that's making me think now. But so, I mean, I want to say now on this topic of butch erasure, which you've covered, because I mean, one of the other factors that you cited, I mean, in addition to the trans thing, which we'll get to, is the whole concept of like queerness, but also bisexuality and how, I don't know, like when I was in college over 10 years ago, most of the girls had a bi phase and, it just kind of became commonplace. And clearly, these were straight women who just wanted to play around, who wanted to experiment. But again, you're just pointing out how like the LGB and T and the Q and the all the other things kind of got lumped together, and it's like those girls who are kind of experimenting have kind of, I guess, overshadowed the like regular
Mm,
lesbian, especially the butch lesbian. And I don't know, like I'm curious to hear more of your thoughts on that kind of phenomenon of like the woman who's experimenting, who's fluid, and how that's kind of, again, like overshadowed the standard
mm.
lesbian.
I used to get offended by it, and
Mm,
I don't anymore at all. In fact, I think I was a bit of an idiot, being offended by it. I think that some of the portrayals in the media of those characters that had a big public profile, was about media representation rather than, yeah, so kissing a girl, another woman on stage, or talking about how, she was attracted to some woman even though she was straight, or so what? Good, go for it, girl, go for it.
mm,
Don't pretend though that you're queer and that you have a place on the list when it comes to the LGBTQIA two spirit plus group. You are not oppressed. You are not an oppressed minority.
yeah,
Just don't bring that self-pity and self-aggrandizement into the mix, because actually I hate the victim culture within the lesbian and gay,
yeah,
well, within the whole queer movement. It doesn't appeal to me at all. But particularly if somebody is whinging about her oppression because she's had a bit of a flirt with a woman and then goes back to her boyfriend, goes back to her husband. But it harms no one for her to do that. And
yeah.
actually, there's lots of women who have done that bit of experimentation and have ended up being committed full-time lesbians because
Mm,
they realized it was actually for them. Go
yeah.
for it.
Yeah, I mean, because I don't know, you notice that more straight women are going to have a bi phase or be fluid than men. And I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's for several reasons, both, I don't know, I would argue both biological and socially conditioned. But the thing that I notice with a lot of these girls who, again, like back over 10 years ago in college, who is suddenly discover, oh, I'm bi, and now I'm an oppressed minority, and I'm gonna, present my identity to the world. If a gay male did that, if a male was like, you know what, I actually think I like women a little bit, I'm sliding down the Kinsey scale, I'm gonna experiment, they would be chastised because they're betraying their true identity. They're betraying the movement. They're trying to trick and confuse women. And I'm like, wait, why are the straight girls allowed to
Yeah.
experiment? with the game, and it's like, no, you're a traitor now, and you're lying to yourself. Like,
Mm.
what? What? I don't know. I mean, what is that? Why is
Ah,
that a
it's
thing?
interesting question, and not one that I've thought of.
Hmm.
Back in the day, it must have been in the 1980s. I don't
Yeah.
remember. It was a long time ago when was it Tom Robinson or Tom someone or other who sang Glad to Be Gay.
Hmm.
He was kind of a pop star
Yeah.
and he had this it became an anthem, sing if you're glad to be gay, sing if you're happy that way. And the next thing we know, he was off with a woman.
Hmm.
And oh my God, you would honestly think he'd gone round to every single gay's house and put their windows in, right? You really would, throwing paint
Yeah.
on their doorstep. It was a bit odd, I have to say. It was a, oh, wow, he's straight now. And there are lesbians who, we created a term hasbians for, who
Yeah.
had been very committed lesbians and feminists. And the next thing you know, there's one woman in particular I can remember who suddenly was with a man, pregnant with triplets, and
Wow.
married to him, and just fully, fully 100% committed heterosexual. And that has happened
Yeah.
over the years. And I don't really hear it about gay men, hardly at all. And I think it is more stigmatized.
Hmm.
I think it definitely is, because I suppose gay identity it's always argued about as though it is completely and utterly fixed. You are born that way.
Yeah.
It's a gay gene, which I don't believe in.
Sure.
And lesbians, even if you still believe in the born that way, which I know some lesbians do, not as many as gay men, female sexuality is seen as considered to be more fluid. I don't know
Hmm.
whether that's the case or
Hmm.
not. I really don't, but I think it's possibly just the way that we have latched onto this gay gene. It makes everyone feel more comfortable. If you can't help it, then leave them alone. Well, that's never worked for females. It's never worked for black or
Yeah.
brown people. We can't help it, leave us alone. That argument just doesn't translate into being treated better. It's not the
Yeah.
answer. So maybe
Hmm.
that's it. Maybe it's the gay
Okay.
gene thing.
Interesting. Yeah, so I mean now I want to get into the trans issue because I mean let's start with this. One of the points that you've raised that I've seen a lot of other people raise is that there's, total erasure of the tomboy or the Nancy boy for males. If you are growing up and you don't fully identify or connect with the like predominant stereotype of your sex, now there's more impetus to transition or to say, it's because deep down you're actually a boy. It's not that you just happen to like things that are considered more masculine. Um, yeah, I mean, tell me more about how you see this playing out because I don't know. I mean, I think about myself. Like, yeah, I liked things as a kid that were stereotypically girly, and my parents, who were very progressive, back 30 years ago, were like, it's okay if you like a Barbie doll, but you're a boy. You're not going to wear a dress outside of the house. If I grew up 20 years later, I don't know what would happen. So I don't know. I mean, thoughts on that
Mm.
phenomenon.
Yeah, I suppose pre-women's liberation movement and pre the gay liberation movement that, as we've already mentioned, were pretty much hand in hand back in the early days of those movements. Pre those movements, it was you've got a little girl, here's a pink baby grow, you've got a little boy, here's a blue one, paint
Hmm.
his nursery blue, paint the girl's nursery pink. Feminism came along, we can have pink or blue. There's no such thing as girls' toys and boys' toys. It doesn't matter what you play with, it doesn't matter whether you paint that little boy's nursery pink if he likes that, or the little girl's nursery blue. Trans activism comes along. Oh, you're a boy, you like pink, you must be a girl.
Hmm.
Oh, you're a girl, you like blue, you must be a boy. Now that's clearly, you know, reductive, but that is what we've got. We've
Yeah.
got now a return to the worst, most damaging sexist stereotypes that feminists fought, that many gay men and lesbians fought, and here we are with a progressive flag wrapped around it. And the first article that I ever wrote about that particular issue. Well, the first one was in 2003, which didn't go online. It was just before newspaper magazine supplements were going online. So that was for the Sunday Telegraph. And that was about the transsexual industry and about the madness of telling people they're born in the wrong body. But the one that I got in real trouble for, that went online and is still online,
Mm.
was the headline was Gender Benders Beware. You know,
Mm.
journalists don't write our own headlines. It was
Yeah,
not the one I would have chosen, but hey.
sure.
And it was railing, it was a comment piece railing against the return of sexist stereotypes. And as a lesbian, I found that particularly troubling and defensive.
Mm.
And I said that the whole gender movement, and remember, this was like 22 years ago, so it was back in
Oh,
the very
wow.
early days. It was
Oh,
before, it was
yeah.
just before the modern trans activist movement emerged. And I'm afraid to say, I think I was one of the drivers for that. And this is not, trust me, I am not bragging or proud of that,
I mean, that's a
but
big deal, though.
it was a pretty big deal.
Wow.
But that it caused a major, major furore because I was saying I'm a lesbian. If I'd have been um, born 20, 30 years later, I would have been marched down the gender clinic. I remember dressing up in the bathroom at home, t trying on my brother's jeans and
Yeah.
shirts. Not because I was a boy, but because I felt different. I didn't want to wear the dresses, the skirts. I hated my school uniform. Lots of girls do. But here we are now with a return, but way worse in many ways.
Mm.
Because, of course, we've got gender clinics, we've got testosterone, estrogen, we've got puberty blockers.
Yeah.
Although obviously there's been a big shift in the UK, we've got an opportunity presented to children who feel bad about their bodies to have it chopped up, messed around with,
Yeah.
and drugged. But there is one thing that I want to add to the whole notion that we're transing away the gay when it's kids that, and it's right, we are, or we were, when boys are sissy presenting and girls are butch presenting, that we put them in a box of being transgender. There's something else that's happening with kids. Kids who are neither sissy or butch, but who have been raped, traumatized,
Mm.
neglected, abused,
Wow.
want to escape their bodies. And this is really barbaric. When I found that the highest number of referrals to the gender clinic in the north of England, it was the Tavistock version, but in the north, the Tavistock Gender Identity Clinic, um, that there's been such a huge amount of controversy around, and thankfully now is closed.
Mm.
But I found out a couple of years ago that the highest number of referrals to the northern one was from Blackpool. Now, there's no reason for you to know this, but UK listeners will know
Yeah.
Blackpool is one of the most deprived areas, towns in the whole of the UK.
Mm.
It's a seaside town. It has the highest number of convicted child sex offenders in residence there.
Wow.
It has a huge number of child suicides, single parent pretty much slum households.
Mm.
It has every social deprivation problem you can imagine. And it's a town I know very well because I did quite a big investigation into organised child abuse there back in the early 2000s. And I used to
Mm.
go there as a kid for holiday. Working class kids went there for holiday, right?
Yeah.
And the highest number of referrals. Okay, well, this was puzzling to me because this is an upper class movement, this, the transing of kids.
Yeah.
These are upper middle class, educated, liberal leftish parents who are very proud to have a trans or non-binary kid.
Yeah.
They're being sent to the gender clinics by these proud parents. I don't know, I mean, any mainstream media publication that doesn't have at least one senior editor on its staff who has a trans identified child, right? This is a top-down movement. Blackpool, really, really deprived. The
Yeah.
girls, many of the girls that were being sent to gender clinics had been in psychiatric units,
Wow.
had presented it to clinicians of any stripe for being abused and harmed, had been taken off their parents and were in care. So I thought, okay, what do all of these girls have in common? And then, of course, I realized they have a social worker, and the social workers are doing a shop job on these kids.
Wow.
You hate your body, you're self-harming, you're anorexic, you're in terrible turmoil. Okay, maybe you have gender dysphoria.
My
Maybe
God.
you should go to the gender clinic. How barbaric is that? That we're
Yeah.
doing that to
Wow.
children.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard much about that side of it, and I think that's not on a lot of people's radar. I mean, definitely the kid who doesn't fit the stereotype, but I mean,
Right.
abuse and those kinds of, yeah. I mean, that's even scarier now that you're
Yeah.
you're describing it,
Yeah,
but
I think so, because transing away the gay, I mean, gay kids that end up
sure.
in gender clinics, that they are some psychologists,
Hmm.
some clinicians who look at those kids and realize that actually there is some turmoil going on because they are
Yeah.
being bullied in the schoolyard and they're being maybe confined by their parents, although this is less common now by a long way than when I was a kid. But the abused kids that are presenting with terrible traumatic responses to stuff that's happened to them,
Yeah.
that we as non-clinicians would be able to spot,
Hmm.
they're not being offered any talking therapies that are relevant to their pain and
Yeah.
distress and suffering.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, the other thing that I've been noticing over the last few years about the trans debate is that I think the lines of the debate, US versus UK, are very different because, I mean, yeah, I've met a lot of feminists in the UK who are, as they say, quote unquote, TERFs, who are very critical of the trans movement. Um, and like in the US, most of the people who are critical of everything trans are, conventionally labeled
Yeah,
conservatives. A lot of
yeah.
them motivated by religious belief. Whereas in the UK, it seems like it's this commitment to liberalism, to feminism, to freedom of expression.
And to gay rights.
Anti-gay rights. Whereas again, like I don't see the religious dimension as much. And I know again,
Mm.
like religion in the UK is very different from the US, but no, it's just the fault lines are very much distinct. Like if you're, a self-respecting feminist in the US, like you have to jump on board with the trans thing. Like you have very few, again, quote
Yeah,
unquote, TERFs here.
yeah.
I'm curious, I don't know. I mean, like what do you see there in those different fault lines, US versus UK? Like, do you observe that? Like, what I'm
Oh,
saying
yes.
here? Yeah.
Yes, I have. There's no left in the US, I think. There's no political left, and
Mm,
therefore there's very little of activists that are grounded in material reality. A lot of it seems to be based on identity politics.
mm,
And, we have those problems here in the UK, but we still have activists on the left that are rooted in material reality, although
yeah.
far fewer than before. I won't organise on the left anymore. I
Hmm.
haven't moved to the right, and I don't believe any of the foundational, um, I think probably theories and policies that the kind of mainstream right um, offer. So, I will remain principally on the left, but I will not
Hmm.
organise with the ones that have the unionists and the so-called socialists that are supporting big pharma, that are supporting the medicalisation of kids, that are turning completely against women's rights, and that are using the opportunity to really shit on women from a great height because they haven't been able to for some time because it was seen as unacceptable for men to be blatantly misogynistic if they're on the left. Now they have an opportunity. And for many of them, the word turf actually means cunt. That's what it
Hmm.
means, you
Wow.
know. Um, so I think the difference between the US and the UK is that the UK's always had a very strong feminist movement dedicated primarily to ending male violence, to
Hmm.
ending systems of male violence,
Yeah.
which we see underpins all of patriarchy, and that until we end that violence, no woman will be free wherever she is in the world. So,
Yeah.
systems of prostitution, the surrogacy trade, which is out of control, domestic violence and femicide. forced marriage, FGM, and all of those issues that we recognize as male violence. So when
Mm.
the trans threat comes along and we see that there's yet another opportunity for male sexual predators
Yeah.
to approach the most vulnerable women, including women in prison, which I've long campaigned around, or in our refuges, our rape crisis centres that we built from nothing,
Yeah.
then we're
Mm.
going to take offence at that. Whereas in the US, it seems to be built around this notion of identity
Yeah.
of people that are against Trump or just against the bad people. And I've had people asking me routinely when I'm either in the US or in the UK, how do you feel being on the same side as Trump? And I can't help them with that because Trump knows there are two sexes, primarily because he knows which one to sexually harass and abuse. I know there are two sexes because I've had to fight sex discrimination. And actually, it happens to be the truth and the scientific reality, like the world is round. So I
Yeah.
can't help them with that answer. And if they think your enemy's enemy is your friend, which a lot of American liberals
Mm.
seem to think, then this is a terrible misfortune that they won't support something because Trump has pretended to support the rights of women and girls by doing his, men in women's sports stuff, which I'm glad he did, don't get me wrong, but he
Sure.
certainly didn't do it because he's a
Yeah.
feminist or because he cares about
Yeah.
women's rights.
But this is what you're the way you're distinguishing like the commitment to material, like actual issues versus identitarian, very abstract ones is key here because I mean it's that, but it's also I think this moral anxiety that we have in the US, which I think is just like the legacy of our Puritan forefathers. Because exactly what you're saying, like a lot of people who would consider themselves liberal, progressive on the left do so because they think like this is the right side of history.
Yes.
If I want to be a good person, a morally good person, I need to be on this side. And, people on this side defend the oppressed, which includes women,
Hmm.
gays, trans, Muslim, disabled people, blah, blah, blah. There's no like critical distinction between
Mm.
these different groups, but also like different causes, different,
Oh yeah.
whatever. It's all the same because that's the good side, and then the other people are on the bad side. And if Trump, enacts this policy with the trans and the sports, well, I can't say that there are two genders because Trump says that and he's on the bad side. So I guess I just
Yeah.
need to support everything trans, even though having a trans athlete doing MMA is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, like I think about the last two articles we published by you in Compact, and it's like most Americans would read that and be like, oh, she's really conservative.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, I know that's not the case, but I don't know. So, but it's interesting again. It's like I think it's the identity thing, but also I just most of the Americans I know have this very deep moral anxiety, and on the right as well. Like a lot of the people on the right
Yeah.
who support Trump do so because it's like, oh, well, those evil liberals, they like the immigrants and they like the
Oh
gays
yeah.
and they like, so I can't be on that side. So I just categorically support everything Trump says because it's the
Yeah. And
identity
there
and
is
the
a
moral thing. Yeah.
yeah, there's a woke right as well as a woke left, and I think that the lack of critical analysis and the lack of thought and intelligence that goes into these issues is
Yeah.
shocking to me. So you have, as you say, someone who decides they're on the left because there's the right side of history, and we know history does not have a side,
Sure.
and all of a sudden they are supporting, right, okay, so we support the Muslims, that one's ticked off. So we support mullahs who are calling for the execution of women who've been raped because they've been unfaithful to their husbands, do we? So we support those extremists, and I support no fundamentalist religious nut jobs,
Mm.
not one of them from any of the mainstream religions. So all of a sudden, we're supporting the most extreme Islamists as opposed to Muslim residents, citizens,
Yeah.
people, regular human beings. They don't seem to make the distinction. They think that because Trump obviously is outrageous in his policies
Mm.
in rounding up so-called illegal immigrants, that means that you support all of the extremists who wish to see an end to democracy. Where did that come from? And you have other people on the list. You have all of a sudden, well, we have to support sex workers because they are an oppressed minority. No,
Yeah.
women in the sex trade
Yeah.
are the most abused women on the planet. What we need to do is not normalize it, legalize it, and make it easier for men to pimp and buy them.
Yeah.
So there's no critical analysis of what oppression is and which groups fit
Mm.
where. And that's what really offends me.
Yeah. And I mean, I just quickly, it's interesting again with like the last article you wrote about the women converting to Islam because yeah, I don't know. Like I wrote something recently that was like mildly positive about, Islam, writing from a kind of like ecumenical Christian perspective,
Mm,
whatever. And again, I was like, okay, I'm very much aware of extremists like the one you were mentioning in your article. And that's something that, at least in the US, liberals are very naive about. I'm not naive about it. I acknowledge it to be very,
right,
concerning. But I also recognize that there are Muslims who are good people who are trying to like contribute to society, who are
right,
spiritual people, and that, I don't know, like people should be interested in trying um to collaborate where possible, but also to like, kind of encourage that kind of Islam. People read the
right.
article and were like, "Oh, what a libtard! You don't realize they're all terrorists and they're trying to bomb us and they're raping our women." I'm like, I
Oh
never said.
God.
It's like you read something positive. It's like clearly
Yeah.
you're a leftist. Clearly you don't
Oh,
care about terrorism. And I'm like, this being quick to like put people in the box and not engage with, again, like critically engage with like what are you actually saying? What's going on here? I don't know. I find it exhausting, entertaining at times because it's so ridiculous.
it is
But
exhausting though because it's so stupid.
yeah.
It's the stupidity you can't get through to people. And you're also supposed to behave in a particular way and have a particular set of views. If, like me, as a feminist, you are critical of Islamist male patriarchs dictating to women
Mm,
and wishing to remove all rights from women, you're
yeah.
supposed to then be critical of any Muslim who comes to live in the UK. My, whatever the secular version of godchildren is, I don't know. My
Mm,
godchildren are born of religious Muslim parents from Eritrea who came
mm,
to this country as asylum seekers and who now massively contribute to society
yeah.
and are amazing people. And they lived with us when they came to this country because we didn't know them, but they had nowhere to go. And it was a chain of events that meant if we didn't take them in, they'd be on the streets.
Mm,
We learned from each other. It was great. I go berserk to them about some of the lunatics that are wishing to take away women's rights. They tell me about the racism that they've experienced from people that think they're all terrorists. It's great because it means we talk to each other and we learn.
yeah.
When did that stop? Not just with the trans
Yeah.
thing, with every single issue that is a tick box issue that we're supposed to have a line on, you don't deviate from it. It's like living under some kind of intellectual totalitarianism.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So, I hope this conversation, if anything, encourages people think outside the box to maybe talk to people who you think are on the wrong side of history, maybe find out what they actually think. And yeah, I encourage people to pick up Julie's book you also have a Substack, right? That
I do.
we
Yeah.
can link to that and check out some of your articles. But yeah, Julie, thank you so much for coming on to talk,
Well, it's been great. Thanks so much for inviting me.
of course. Um,